Okay, welcome ladies and gents. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'll very briefly introduce our speaker in a moment. Jamie and I go a long way back, but nice to see everybody. Hopefully, well, first and foremost, did anybody get an email from IOP telling you about this event? Don't all rush it once to put your hand up. Oh, a few. That's good. If you would like to be directly contacted about these, please speak to either Neil at the back, myself or Mike, who are your IOP sort of committee members, because we can add you to the mailing list then. So rather than hearing this second hand, you might get it delivered to you. And so this is, if you weren't aware, a series of talks hosted by the Institute of Physics, so we can thank them for funding for this. And I'm going to very briefly introduce you to tonight's speaker. And I say this every month, but I've got a memory like a sieve, so even though I do know Jamie, but I've got a few crib notes. So, first and foremost, a warm North Staffordshire welcome to Dr Pringle, who is a reader in Forensic Geosciences at Keele University. Having worked here for 20 plus years, during his time, as well as teaching and learning, he has, with allied colleagues at Keele and elsewhere, and consulting, conducting on at least 50 forensic searches. Good, he's still nodding, yeah. So yeah, good. For a variety of objects for criminal, civil, environmental, wildlife agencies and law enforcement, both domestic and abroad. Dr Pringle is a chartered geologist, sits on the Geological Society's Chartership Scrutineering Panel, that's easier to say than it is than it looks, on the NERC Peer Review College, and is a member of the Near Surface Geophysics, Forensic Geoscience and Educational Specialist subgroups of the Geological Society of London. And now I can go and take a breath, and we can all welcome Dr Jamie Pringle.
Thanks for that very eloquent introduction, Scott. Appreciate that. So I'm going to go through. 45 minutes was the remit, so I'll hopefully stick to that. And then there's a time for questions, and hopefully you'll have some at the end. So just briefly, just a quick little video covering what we do here at Keele.
So my name is Dr Jamie Pringle. I'm a senior lecturer here at Keele University.
Is that a date already?
So I lead a multidisciplinary research team of forensic geoscientists dedicated to aid the police force and the wider community. We provide assistance and advice on both land and water searches specifically, both here in the UK and internationally. Past assistances include searching for active missing persons, sadly for body recovery,
as well
as to assist for unsolved cold cases. Other applications include weapon searches, graveyard and archaeology surveys, environmental contamination and wildlife and environmental crime cases.
Could have been slightly more polished, I feel. But anyway, you get the plan. Right, if I can move next. Okay, and obviously no research happens in isolation. We're part of a bigger group. Here's some of my colleagues, both from Keele and other universities around. And I should say I've probably had about 100 students, either on their undergraduate or postgraduate projects, helping out and doing a variety of tasks. I don't think this is just me doing everything. This is a bigger group doing all sorts of stuff. Paul Hassan's stuck in Kuwait at the minute, so I'm hoping he's going to come back when he gets a flight and carry on doing some research with us. Okay, so we're going to go through a little bit about forensic geophysics. Forensic geophysics, so it's basically physical properties of the ground, forensic geophysics, and how that helps in a forensic context. And that helps with crime scene investigations. I guess more boringly, we do a lot of stuff on fly tipping, badger set interference, other items of interest, but everyone's always interested in people, aren't they? So that's probably what I'm going to focus on tonight. I'm going to show you some of the sort of different techniques. I'm going to pick a few cases where we've used different geophysical methods, just so you've got a bit more of an idea how that works. Who knows, maybe after this you'll be inspired, you can be a forensic geophysicist. But I am talking about missing people, so there is if you do, hopefully you've seen that in the title, right? So you might hopefully not find that too upsetting. So if we think a little bit about missing people, a lot of things like 70% of all burial grounds in the UK are classed as full. So where are there not people, and then where they can then put someone fresh. So a lot of the unmarked burial grounds is actually quite common. Overseas, happily, we don't have too many mass graves in the UK. Overseas, sadly, that is the case. So again, is it new? Is it historical? How do you find them? That's quite a common challenge we have. If someone's been stabbed, I don't like Scott. He keeps telling me I've got the wrong bio. I've stabbed him. I've chucked my weapon in there somewhere. that's critical evidence for the police to find that weapon. Similar, if I've got rid of him, I've buried him somewhere, it's very rare to get a conviction without a body, although we'll talk about one case where that isn't the case. So that's a big issue with that. If it's environmental crime, it's getting more expensive to get rid of your unwanted items. A lot of people sadly chuck it, don't they? So how much is there? When have they done it? That's really critical as well. So again, timing is quite. Can we help with that? Wildlife all seems to be about badges set interference. I don't know why. It just seems quite a common thing. A lot of people sadly use them for dogfighting practice and stuff like that. So there's a whole sort of fraternity. That's a different talk though, happily for us. And even where primary and secondary, where you've dug something, tried to hide it, and then moved it maybe somewhere else, and where those primary and secondary areas are as well. We've done cases on those. So it's sort of big variety of targets that we're looking for. But obviously graves are the fun stuff, so that's the thing we're gonna focus on at the minute. And I should say, don't panic. Look at statistics of missing people. It's always been the same. It's very unlikely you're going to be randomly snatched off the street. It's mostly you'll know your killer. It's a friend or a family member that you know. And 90% of all cases get solved conventionally. Keep your phone on you. This ends up being a top tips lecture, but keep your phone on you because that's the place we're going to triangulate where you're last seen. So. Other things out there you've seen, I just love that dog, so I've kept him on. So you have specialist dogs who are trained on these specialist dogs, obviously for drugs. You've probably seen that at the airport. They're cadaver dogs, so they're sort of specifically trained to look for missing people. So they're pretty good, to be fair. Helicopter thermal cameras, that's quite common as well. Walking over areas, that's common as well. But where some of these things aren't working, or you're not trying to, it doesn't work, that's where we come in. So normally we get the difficult cases when they've tried other things as well. And ideally, we're not digging up places, destroying potential forensic evidence. We're saying in this area here, there's 1, 2, 3 areas of interest that are geophysically, so physical properties are different there than elsewhere. So we can't say exactly what's causing it, but we can say those areas of interest that you want to go and excavate. I'll show you that in a minute. I say it's relatively rapid. If you ever push the trolley up and down slowly, that's what the radar system is basically. So we can't do massive areas, but it's quicker than digging it all up. That's the positives. And you'll be happy to know there is usually a plan, and where we get involved is fairly late on in that sort of investigation. So you start off with the planning, background information, briefings about the job that you're on. You'll then go a series of getting information about those areas, sites, maybe do some reconnaissance work. Is it actually detectable? Is it diggable? Is there control studies that you can do to see if it works or not? Then you start moving to logistics, assets, before it starts getting more expensive, both in time and money, that activity level, the y-axis on this case. And then you start going, oh, which techniques do you use? And sometimes it might be not actually useful for us. So I've stabbed Scott, I've chucked my knife in a scrapyard. Would I be able to find that, do you think, using geophysics? Why not? Because there's no contrast between my target and the environment itself. So I'll probably use a dog who's a sniffer dog who's on blood, and they'd probably basically be able to pick it up. But yeah, so again, background is also important, isn't it? Your environment of where you're looking for things. So in a graveyard, everyone thinks that's a great idea to put someone who you've murdered because there's all the other bodies there as well, isn't there? But you will see fresh disturbance, so you have to be slightly more clever with that. So try not to do that, by the way. 3 cases last year where they got people in a graveyard. And then we'll collect some data, hopefully designate certain areas, which maybe then the police will then go and have a look at what it is. But also you need critically an exit strategy. So what about if you can't find it? Well, that's why you have a written protocol. You decide what you do, you survey the area, you work up the data, give them the report, they dig in the areas that you tell them to. If they don't find anything, that's a nobody confirmed and that area is cleared for forensic investigation. So that's also a success, even though you haven't found anything. Perfect. Not always about land though. Only 10% of people actually get buried. 30% are in water, so that's a much more common scenario. Top tip, got to weigh them down, sort of bob up after a while. We also use geophysics for that as well. We use sonar systems, that's acoustic sound waves. It's a little ball that you can get, and it's very good for floating objects and things at the bottom of whatever the water body is. If your target is below that water substrate interface, that's where you need radar systems that will penetrate below that and see where these buried objects are. So again, it depends on your target, the background, vegetation, things like that. So again, it's important. There's also water dogs. They have water search recovery dogs, if you didn't know. Divers is tricky in the UK because it's really poor visibility, but there are water LiDAR out there to try and help them work out where they're going to be actually looking for. So you're part of a bigger team, hopefully, with an organised system like I've hopefully shown you. Right, so geophysics, active sort of basics for you. There's only 2 techniques that are passive. Anyone guess what those 2 techniques might be? Walking. Two methods. One's gravity, because you're measuring the Earth's gravity field, and the other one is magnetic, so you're measuring the Earth's magnetic field, and you're looking for small changes over something that you're looking for. So my very large knife now that I've killed Scott, and I'm doing a magnetic survey, it'll hopefully show slightly higher readings where that magnetic body is located compared to everywhere else. So that's why you need to design your survey to be large enough to cover the target and the background areas as well. Everything else uses some sort of technology that you're pulsing some sort of signal, you're getting some response, and you're measuring what the differences are. And again, depending upon what you're looking for will depend on what sort of instruments you're using, the techniques, and then sort of spacing as well. There's also things about timing as well. So this is my very badly drawn body. I've got rid of Scott now, I've buried him. It's fairly obvious where it is, because it's a big fresh mound of earth, right? So that's pretty easy, don't even need me, which is great. As he starts decomposing, so that's sort of weeks in our sort of temperatures and humidities, he'll be letting off lighter than air gases, volatile organic compounds. That's where the dog teams come in. Right, he's getting quite grisly now. His chest cavity's collapsing. He's letting out 70% of himself as salty water. That's a really good resistivity target, so how resistant the ground is to a current. So we'd use a resistivity survey if in that active phase, which is sort of months in our sort of environment. And finally, still haven't found him, I'm not very good. He's skeletonized, the ground's compacted, the vegetation changes might be slightly different. You can see that in spectral sort of drone imagery. But maybe radar might be best to find them, because I'm trying to find his objects, as in his bones that are left behind. If he's been wrapped, and then half of people who've been found are wrapped or clothed, that's actually helpful, because that's a better radar response. You're getting a better reflectivity off that. So top tip as well, make sure, a bit grisly, get rid of his clothes as well. But yeah, what works best is difficult, and again, there's a bit of lack of research into what's the best method for different targets, and of course every area is different. The time frame's different, archaeology, so anything over 100 years is archaeological, anything less than 100 years is forensic. So again, that's one of the first things that police will ask you, how old's the person gone missing for, which is interesting in itself. Could be older murders, isn't there, right? But that's just how it is. And that sort of temporal change is quite difficult. And of course, the deeper you bury them, the harder it is to find, but then the longer they last as well. So that's another sort of thing to think about. So in our sort of humidities, he'll skeletonise in about a year. If I buried him 2 metres down, he may last for 10 years, but then it's harder to find, obviously, the deeper you bury someone. You've got more material between you and the target, unless there's something really strong in that target, like he's got something big and metal on him, like a bike or something that he's with. You've seen other ones as well, environmental issues. If it's really peaty, you've seen the peat man, the people that sort of, yeah, from Ireland. So again, very anaerobic, wasn't it? So the body lasts longer. Or they've seen those Inca child sacrifices that they found up in the Andes in South America, been really dry. They've mummified basically, sort of 500 years old. So there's different environments that happen as well. If you've ever seen the body farm video, I think that in Tennessee, where they use humans and look at how they decompose, it's really hot there, so they can skeletonise in a few days to weeks. Again, it'll vary depending upon what target you're looking for. Yes, you've got the temporal problem, then you've got to think about your burial problem. This is a case in Cannock Chase. We worked on a few years ago, where they think a criminal had lured his opposite rival to an isolated area in the woods and pre-dug a vertical grave. Now that's actually a little bit trickier, because you've got, other than squashing them in once you've killed him, but you've got a smaller target spatially, haven't you? Because you've got a smaller area, so therefore, if we knew that, which we did, we could tighten up our grid to make sure we're not going to miss that smaller target on our survey. Some people use graveyards for control work to work out whether they're detectable or not, but you've got a problem there, haven't you? Because they're usually buried deeper, so you've got bigger soil, your target's deeper, harder to find, maybe they've got embalming fluid, you've got all the coffin furniture, the sort of the handles and things like that. So it's quite different from a clandestine burial, although legally the minimum depth that you can be buried at is 0.4 of a metre, so like a foot down, because we're running out of space, as I mentioned earlier, so they can actually bury you quite shallowly in graveyards. Happy, did I tell you this is going to be a happy 45 minutes? But it is quite useful. We've done a bit of study up in Keele Church, just at the back there, just where I had some dinner, to see what our older burials look like. And we know how long they've been buried for because it says on the headstone, assuming the headstone's where it should be, and often they're not, actually, because it takes them 6 months and they're not quite in the right spot. So that's a slight problem. But and we can see over time, as time increases, resistance seems to go down in a very nice linear fashion. It's even statistically valid, which is unusual for a student project. So I was happy with that. But looking at different graveyards, it's actually different from the Silverdale Cemetery down the hill. We've done the same study. So in the same site, it works well, but it's quite difficult to give it it's going to be this amount in different areas, as every site's different. And in fact, we've done studies on graveyards. They're not hardly ever on their own where the headstone is. There's either more people, they're offset, there's like gaps at the side. We found some 7 deep, sort of keep being buried from the 19th century, or they're in some sort of memorial ground where you can't survey them, or in fact there's people where they shouldn't be. You're like, well, who's that? So again, it's quite interesting when you start doing surveys, and all those different scenarios will give you different geophysical responses, which is what this is trying to show you. So this is a typical resistivity response, that middle ones. This is magnetics, and these are the radar responses, and you notice they're quite different depending upon the burials, even though there's one person in each one. So again, those sort of varieties gives you different responses geophysically. Right, so now the more grisly stuff. I'll show you a few cases where we've tried using different techniques to find different people. So this is one still unsolved, looking for Paige Chivers, who went missing in 2007. As for most of these cold cases, they're not happy stories, I'm afraid, so give us a bit of a background for you there. They were pretty sure who did it, and in fact, he was the chief suspect, Robert Ewing, was convicted of a murder without a body being present, which is fairly unusual, but there's overwhelming circumstantial evidence to suggest he'd killed and murdered her, and there's missing carpet and her blood spots they've identified in his house. So you can read that up if you wish. So he was in prison, and he started to talk to his cellmate. And he said, "Oh yes, I've killed her and I've buried her in this churchyard." So the police spent a lot of time finding archaeological skeletons from the graveyard all summer while they were trying to clear that up. And then he said, "Oh no, I've buried her in this spot, which is on the outskirts of Blackpool." This is where we got involved. So we started to go through that phased investigation that I showed you earlier. It was quite clay soil, quite wet ground. One entry point from which is possibly good. Normal statistics are I've killed Scott, got annoyed at him, put him in my car, wrapped him up, drove off somewhere, started to drag him off somewhere. Actually, he's quite tired. Dead weight is dead weight. It's quite heavy. You get quite tired. Well, look at him. I'll go in. And I'm only going to go 20 metres in and 200 metres either side of that entrance point. So that's on statistics of buried people. So that's going to be our priority area to look for. Happily, we had a forensic botanist from Natural History Museum. So he actually he removed the vegetation, looked at each species type and their growth, and then removed that back to 2007 levels when she went missing. Looked at the size of the missing individual and their burial style, looked at what our control data showed, and had half a chance to think we might be able to find them. Slightly complicated by the fact the area was also used as a sort of an animal sanctuary with a lot of sick animals there, and apparently they buried them on site, so that's not ideal for us. So Andy, one of my colleagues up in Lancaster, did the initial electromagnetic survey around the edges of that missing area. That's what those grey boxes show on that plot. Based on those statistics, so that's what we're going to go for. We're not saying they're not going to be in the middle, but they're more likely to be around the edges because you're more hidden You feel safer, I guess, psychologically, and you'll be burying people around the edge. Is what they say. There's quite a few anomalies out there. I think, as you can see here, has been listed, and obviously they dug all of those up. I actually did find a horse burial as one of those causes. So we could say, well, it wasn't what we're looking for, but it was picking up an isolated target of roughly the same size, if slightly bigger, using those sort of methods. And that is actually quite a nice system, that EM system, because it's actually got a transmitter-receiver pair, but there's 3 of those, and they're spaced sequentially apart, so that you can see the nearest spaced ones would see certain depths, the middle one will see deeper depths, and the wider one will see the deepest. So you're actually getting 3 effective depths of investigation from your data. So once you start analysing your anomalies, as you can see there's a little anomaly A and B listed on that area, you can actually work out what's causing it and how far down it might be. So that's going to help the investigators when they're digging them up. So you can see those in different depths. So that's the shallowest, I think, quite geophysically noisy, lots of little red and blue blobs of low and high conductivity respectively. That's millisiemens per metre, by the way, in the scale. That's the middle area there, so it's a bit quieter, but you can still see those 2 or 3 anomalies in there. And then the deepest one, there's still something happening. So from that data, anomaly B looks the most likely area in that area of investigation, which is where the horse was. We then had a look at that top sort of one of those corners, collected some ground penetrating radar data. That's probably all 90% of surveys using GPR. There's those annoyingly slow yellow lorries going up and down the M6. They're doing tarmac degradation surveys, looking at how soon the tarmac's going to go. Needs replacing. It's quite a good system for looking for isolated objects. That's an older system, as you can see here. You're effectively getting a 2-dimensional cross-section through the ground, distance along the line at the top, depth effectively down the side, although it measures it in 2-way time because you're pushing out the EM wave and it bounces off something, it gets received, and you measure the time between it gets transmitted and received, and then you can convert this to depth if you know the velocity. So anything which is flat is boring, like the ground or the bog, I think I've written. You've got some sort of increasing with depth linear object there, as you can see down there. That's probably going to be the slope of the bank, and there's a couple of objects in there that look quite interesting, which is what we obviously told the police people. They were excited about that. We flagged them up, and they dug them all up and found a nice drainage pipe, which is not what they were looking for, but they were happy it was working, and in the area that we were tasked with, that was what was there at the site, so they were happy-ish with that. So yeah, quite a tough one. We only had a day or 2 on site, but you can see how we went through that phased investigation steps. Clay soil's not great for radar, but it looked okay from that data, and it wasn't in that area of investigation that they tasked us with. Most cases have got a cost implication, and police forces only have a set budget, so you start having to plead with Central to give you more money. And some of these cases are still open and they cost a lot of money and resources, but police have a duty of care to use all means necessary to try and solve these cases. So it's just why some of those are still open now, and that some of them cost quite significantly more than that. All right, second case I want to briefly talk to you about was one of our really early ones. This is where we're going to use resistivity this time. So rather than EM, seeing how conductive something is going to be, resistivity is how resistant the ground is to a current. So if you've ever had a damp survey on your house, it comes with a little probe, you stick it on the wall, put a current between the probes, measure the resistance, and the lower the resistance, the more problem you have in your house. And all we're going to do then is upscale that to bigger probes. So wider the space of the probes, the deeper that you see. What I didn't realise with this one was the police actually used us to flush the suspect out, because he was hiding on that hill behind Tati's photo, watching us collect the data, and the police are watching him, watching us. So the night after we left, he went down and got caught in the act with the spade, literally. So yeah, not the brains of Britain. In fact, he GPS'd her initials where he buried her, so not the most brainy. Anyway, not a great story. So yeah, so that was the area that he'd been driving around south of Wrexham. And there's a spore heap where he was sat on. So we had a series of fields to look in. The police dog teams hadn't found anything. Often people tend to unconsciously or consciously bury something either either by the dead tree in a wood, or a light rock in dark soil, or a dark rock in light soil, or you unconsciously head for landmarks at night. I don't know why we do this, but just as a species, we head towards. So again, there's those sort of things to look at, behavioural aspects. None of that helped either. So we started off doing field H. She was actually found just down here. So it's that same night that we got off site. But it was very clay soil, not very good for radar. So we went for resistivity. I've got some pigs buried not far from here, where I'm standing. And we've basically surveyed them over time. We can't use humans, sadly, because of the Human Tissue Act, so we use animal cadavers instead. And then we survey them. I'm going to do the year 20 survey, which I'm slightly depressed about, at Christmas, and that'll be the next paper. I guess 20 years of surveying the same thing, but not surprisingly, it's quite hard to find after 20 years, but after 1 year, it's actually quite easy. This is what the data looks like from a naked pig. This is what the data looks like from a rat pig. So actually, wrappings makes it a bit harder to find with resistivity, but actually it's easy to find with the radar. So again, you can try and start sort of thinking about what's the best methods to find. And this sort of big blue blob is probably where you're picking up all the fluid coming out of the pig as it's decomposing. So that's what we'd be looking for if that's what she was there. So we collected lots of data, spent a couple of sweaty days collecting it before he was watching us probably, I guess. And then started to look at what the size of the anomalies are. If they're too big, that's probably not going to do a body there. And looking at the sort of difference from the average of response to then highlight which areas look likely that might be where she was buried. So you can start to play those games, and we got down to about 7 that looked reasonable, that had the right strength and size. Obviously this was a bit academic now because we know she's further to the south in the next field. But a useful technique. Right, so a bit more recent now. This was a job we did very recently, this year in fact. Looking for a missing person of interest. That's what MISPA stands for, by the way. That's a little top tip. So they've been missing since the late 90s, not around here, happily. And intelligence suggested they were buried in a domestic property garden. There's the photo that I took of it. Mostly top tip, never bury someone in your own back garden. And also, the police will probably dig all the garden up. So we're sort of less useful, but we will be able to say, well, some areas look more interesting than others to dig first. Looking at the death study, there was no buildings before this sort of 60s estate was built. So there's no older buildings, there's no utilities, apparently, in the deaths that we could find out. It was quite sandy soil, so sand is good for radar, getting good penetration depth with our EM systems. Resistivity is not going to work well, because I'm not going to get my probes through this sort of crazy paving patio. So again, you're starting to look at the site going, which technique's going to work better. They've been missing since the 1990s. What's that, 35 years ago? My pig's going to go back that far, but certainly the data says it's looking quite tricky to find a naked person over that sort of time. If they're wrapped, maybe. But we didn't have that information. Pigs under patios. Of course, I've got one of those already. He's not far away either. Here he is. That's not a very good picture. But he's been there since 2010. I've surveyed them over time with different frequencies of radar systems. So they come with different size boxes. High frequency, small boxes, only see small objects but near surface. Big boxes see low frequencies, penetrate quite a long way down, but you're not going to see small targets. So again, you've got to think about, well, which frequency would be best? And maybe mid-frequency, I would say, looks better. Low frequency is rubbish. High frequency, you're going to pick up all the little blocks and things, which isn't what you're looking for. So maybe mid-frequency, looking at our data based on that sort of system. But in fact, from my bad drawing, you might be picking up more like the air gap as the chest cavity collapses and the saw compacts back to rather than the actual target itself. Okay, so here's some of our data. So this is what the data looks like. Here's go along the line here. That's a two-way time down the side. You can see there's an object here. There's an object here, and there's an object here. Can you see those sort of three things? If you measure the time between the top of it and the ground, you can get an idea of depth. And what big things have quite a large, that sort of half moon shape. Small things have quite a narrow thing, so you can get an idea of size as well. And here's my little time slice. You can actually, if you collect a lot of 2D lines, you can start creating a cube of data and be able to then go through it over depth. And hopefully you can see some little things happening in here as we go down through our data set. So, so for example, here's quite a linear feature going across those sort of red high colours. Clearly it's too big to be our person. I'm probably picking up someone's pipe there, which is not super useful. Yeah, so that's as we go down a bit more. There's a big blob in the middle. That's obviously too big. It's not what I'm looking for. And then I can start to work out what might be happening. So here's my summary. So I've literally just got some spray paint. Environmentally friendly, of course, it goes after a few months. You can see I've traced across a pipe across the back garden. In fact, there's more than one, isn't there? Can you see that with different orientations? You start going along, going, oh, hang on, oh, it's there again, oh, it's there again. I'm getting slightly less excited now. Oh, no, it's too big. It's not what I'm looking for. So all of those things there isn't ideal. However, there are a few isolated targets. So A2s is something buried there, but it's too small, right? So I'm down to my crazy paving patio in the garden, slightly out the way, in the corner, where there's actually a pole that the present owners use to put their washing out, and that's not showing me anomaly elsewhere. So that's currently where they'll be digging up and tell me what it is, I hope. Last one, this is another cold case we're working on in Manchester. We can tell you a bit more about that because Locate International have asked us to help with them. They're sort of a charity who look at help for missing people cases. So again, a sad one. A daughter's contacted them to say, I've reported my mum missing. She apparently ran away from her dad, but that isn't actually what probably happened. And he's presently in prison, I think, for another murder. So the police did have a look at it in the garden and the back and the house. Couldn't find anyone. And now we've moved to the shared, what is that, the middle cul-de-sac between these houses. And it used to be garages in the 1960s, I think, looking at the death study, which had then been burnt down or fell down and then burnt down. And now there's just a concrete base is the current area of interest that they're looking for. Helpfully, Paul, one of the neighbours, came out and gave us a photo of what they used to look like this before they got demolished. Again, we can look at the old maps to see when they were built. So they were there when she was missing. Not there now, of course, but we've got that big slab of concrete to look at. I think, well, that's slightly unlikely you'd be able to sort of punch through the concrete and leave someone in there. But if they had drop inspection pits, which is what some of the older garages had, so you could work on your bottom of your car from below, that could be potentially an area of interest. So that's something that was the current MO that we were given. That's what it looks like in the summer. Spent about half a day clearing it, because it had about 30 years of rubbish. People fly tipping, which wasn't ideal, obviously. Was made of sequential layers of concrete, which gives you some hope that might be half a chance someone might be there. And then we spent a few days pushing our radar system up and down in a proper grid, quite a close, I think it was 20 centimetre space grid, in that site to make sure are we looking, are we finding things we're looking for. So this is from above. Just we took a drone up. So most surveys you use a drone, take an overhead shot, because that's what the survey area looks like now. Obviously your Google Earth image is 1 or 2 years old often, so they're a bit out of date. So that's what we're going for. You can see it's just about those grey sort of narrow space grid lines of that area. Here's one of the lines, line 18. Hopefully you can see some two obvious anomalies there, yeah? Your object is at the top of the nearest one to the surface, because often the wave will bounce up and down from your object to the ground air interface and keep going up and down like this. So these deeper things aren't real, it's just the one at the top is where you're looking at. You can see the little coloured blobs at the top where we've gone through all the data, worked out where things are, and in fact you can colour code the depth of your target, is what that thing is there. And then I think I made a little bit of video, so again, just did this last night, so it's half a job. You can actually go through your data, go down vertically through the ground, see what might be there. So all those red spots on the top left is probably tree roots, I think. But you are picking up different things happening. Certain areas, certainly right around here, for example. Some things are too big though. Look at the size of that. That's too big. This big thing down here is probably a pipe or something. So that's too large as well. So that's the 250. We also went a bit bells and whistles. We actually did the 500 as well. Also did a closely spaced grid. So 500 megahertz, that's medium frequency, which is what I showed you earlier with the patio. You're not going to see below the concrete there, you're going to see within the concrete itself. Again, you can see one anomaly in this cross section, although it's not as obvious as the others. You're picking up the edge effect, that's what this line is down here, and picking up smaller objects over there, for example. And again, I've made a little time slice for you with these sort of anomalies present. It's not as exciting, I think, but there's certainly something over here again, maybe something over here, and we're picking up those tree roots on this side as well. So again, not super useful, but getting there, I think. And eventually then you can then start to sort of summarise where we're at. So I'm sort of less excited about some of those, because if you notice, these blobs sort of line up in a sort of this way. And did you remember I showed you that garage photo? Probably going to be the garage walls, right? They're going to have some sort of foundation to those. So less excited about those, but certainly there's something, these three areas look interesting. They're on multiple lines. They're the same depths. So there's clearly an object there, isn't there? So I want to know what those are. So our next step is, I've just asked one of our civil engineering companies if they can drill sort of a shallow cores in each of those spots to see what might be causing those. It's probably going to be the foundations of the garage, but of course it'll be nice to know what that is for real. So that's what we're presently going to go back to in April. We've got to do a ground survey first, just to check there's no active cabling in there, because you don't want to be going through active cable when you're drilling. That's going to be a bit of a health and safety problem. But once we get that done, we'll see what those results are likely to be. There were a load of metal detector hits as well, each of those sort of little yellow stars. But again, it could be just people either, well, some of it was debris we hadn't cleaned up after clearing the area. Other bits might be some metal within the concrete as well. But basically, the more techniques you find that show the area, the more likely it is that something's actually buried there. What it is, we don't know until we actually do some drilling. But I think it was only about 1,200 quid they quoted us, so it's very cheap for a commercial job, so they're doing me a favour really, but we'll find out what those are going to be. So maybe the next piece, and I'll let you know what they are. Who knows? Okay, so I mentioned it's not all land-based. We do water stuff as well. Plenty more things get put in water. I've got a PhD student on this as well. In fact, more things get put in structures. I don't know if you know the Fred West case down in Gloucester, but he tended to bump off his rentees and bury them on the walls and the floors of his house. It wasn't until the neighbours complained about the smell I'd actually start investigating. But that's another story. Pigs in concrete, that's my summer job. The next thing to look at to see how that works and can we detect them or not. So here's us messing about in the water.
We're at Keele, one of our Keele lakes on campus. This is where we're going to do a forensic test on here. So we've got two students in a bespoke kayak behind me. Looking at trying to assist police services trying to locate where individuals, if they've sadly gone into the water, where they may be located. So we've got a sonar system on here, a water penetrating radar system. So I'll see both either things floating in the water column or on the bottom of the lake. And in fact, the radar will also see below where the bottom of the lake is into the sediment beneath that, which is quite helpful. If you notice this mannequin behind me as well, this is obviously simulating a drowned individual, so we're going to put that in the lake as well, see if we can find them using our equipment. There's a few variables that we need to try and quantify, things like temperature, water depth, salinity, different frequency of the radar systems that we're using as well. So that's going to really give us some important information once we're doing actual forensic searches for police cases where people have gone missing.
You can tell where that is. So we used some of that information. So we actually did another case in Cannock Chase looking for an individual who went missing. Weren't given a lot of background information other than the fact they've gone in with a weighted pack. Tends to be people change their minds when you start trying to drown yourself, so that's how apparently you're more successful. That's actually interesting as well, because you can maybe be able to pick up the steel rather than the person, so that's useful. In the death study, not much has happened in there. We're not even sure we're in the right lake either, so that's not super helpful. But in the lake we were tasked with, nothing much has changed since the individual went missing and when we did our survey. Did the sonar survey. nothing exciting in there, is there? Big blue area in the middle. In fact, depressingly, it's not actually that deep. You can actually walk across yourself. So I'm thinking, well, it's probably unlikely they're going to be trying to drown yourself if you can't actually get your head under. So that's, I think naturally, apparently you do try not, even though you want to, you try to save yourself. So that's less likely. We also tried our system with a kayak. This is my very bad method of trying to do evenly spaced lines. You can see some big holes in that data, so not brilliant. I think I realised later my electric power system for the kayak is not strong enough, or it's too windy and I keep getting blown sideways. So I was thinking maybe I have to go back and maybe use a steel hawser. I think I've done that before, trying to get a bit more of a regular grid. Otherwise, I'm missing spots. So that is a problem. But we did collect data, and there were certainly a lot of objects in there. And I noticed a sunken post, loads of sunken posts on an old fence or something. So that's definitely getting across the field. Maybe why they all suspiciously line up. There's a lot of sunken tree stumps as well, so that's less exciting. And now I've got an underwater drone, I can actually work out what they all are rather than have to go in myself. It's a bit grim in there as well. So that's my next task, or my students' next task, I should say. Perfect. So I hope you've got a bit of an overview of forensic geophysics now, with a sort of hopefully a plan. We would say a plan or a big van with all the equipment in, but hopefully there's a plan. There's someone in charge, an SIO, he'll be tasked with helping you work that out. There's a few experts in each force called pulsers. They'll be able to work out what's the best method, or know different people to help you, or tell you actually you're not needed. And hopefully you're doing it in a scientifically valid way, producing reports that I've showed you, or talked about at least. And then you might be asked to go to, if you do find something and been in a court as well, you'll be asked to justify your report. So that's why you need to be sort of unbiased, fair, and of course you could be employed to pick holes in someone else's report as well, and often you swap around. So it's not a big field, so you can talk about each other things. But certainly you've got to be thinking a bit about what the target's like, what the background's like of the area that you're surveying. And then maybe where you fit or where you don't fit, and go, actually that's too hard. I think we had a few recently where they're asking about people buried in foundations of a school wall. I'm like, well, I can't help you with that. You're going to have to drill holes, I think. So sometimes you say, actually, I'm not that useful in certain environments. So I've gone through some sort of a few cases for you, talked a bit about other methods. Certainly we could help, maybe, depending upon the environment. Might be site specific. You might be picking up like those metal chains rather than the actual metal, the person themselves, or the fluid perhaps rather than the target. But certainly we do a lot of control work to try and work out which methods work, which ones don't, and does it change over time. That temporal change can be quite challenging. So again, that needs a bit more work on that yet, I suspect. If you're interested in any of those, by the way, obviously we're quite well published in this area, so if you're interested in that, you can just stalk me, I guess, or look at some of these cases we've looked at, not in a weird way, that's a good point. And if you're mildly interested, have you seen the conversation articles? They're quite good, they're like 800-word summaries. Normally they're things topical, so it's all a bit about the Middle East at the minute. But there's we've written a few articles about how to find people or what methods might work and that side of things. So if you're interested in that area, bunkers, aircraft, spoiler, still can't find MH370, big areas, isn't it? I mean, those underwater, it's more rugged than land. So if it's gone in a subterranean ridge or into a hollow, you have real big problems trying to find that in that sort of southern Indian Ocean, if you're aware of that case. So lots of different challenges anyway for surveys. Look at that, I'm 2 minutes ahead, all done.
Thank you, Jamie.
No worries.